It's Louise Bedford here, the host of the Talking Trading Show. This is where traders excel. I have got a very special episode today, and it is deviating slightly from what we usually do because we do focus just on traders. But today I'll be interviewing Matthew, or Whiz Buckley. Now, Matthew was decorated as a Navy Top Gun as an F-18 pilot. He flew 44 combat missions, and he also found his transition out of the military quite a challenge. Now, why should you listen to this show? Firstly, trading is an extremely high pressure environment, and we have to get familiar with transitions ourselves. The difficulties that a lot of our traders face when they move into a full-time trading arena replicate exactly Matthew's experiences, and he has actually become so purpose and mission driven to help other people from the military and first responders respond to life's challenges because they have special needs. This PTSD aspect that is really in the community now is so solid, and it is in so many people's heart that they have had trouble recovering from their past experiences. Now, I'm devoting this show to Jeff Mears. Jeff Mears did our mentor program in 2009, I believe. He is actually ex-bomb disposal, which means he is the coolest person in the entire world. He is so trustworthy. He has helped me in so many ways, and he's been an incredible helper with our mentor program as well. So, Jeff, this show is for you. Now, Matthew, welcome to the show. Tell me, firstly, would you prefer that I call you Matthew or Whiz?
It's Matthew if I'm in trouble with my wife or my mom. It's Whiz for everybody else. So you're clear to call me Whiz.
Brilliant. And look, you're the founder of No Fallen Heroes, and of course the star of the documentary there, which is just magic to see. I've had so much fun researching your background, and one of the things we definitely share is that concern for other people, where we want to give back to our communities, and that is very, very special to both of us. I'd like to kick off by asking you a little bit more about recovery. Traders, when we are in the heat of the moment, every sense is tuned to the screen. We are totally on, and I know in your background, not only with flying but also with looking after your group of people, that you have to be on as well. So how do you recover from such a high pressure environment and settle back down into everyday life?
That's a great question. It actually starts with the pre-flight, right? So when I wake up in the morning and, throw on my bunny slippers and grab a cup of coffee, I don't turn the financial media on. I don't look at anything. I start my day with some mindfulness. Actually, I meditate. And 5 years ago, if I heard me talking about meditation before my trading day, I take my own lunch money and laugh at me. But that guy died on the floor of a house in Mexico, which we can talk about in a little bit. So, and I also do hot yoga in the morning before the market opens. So old me would get up right to the computer screen, right with the TV and looking at it and in it. And that's not the way to do it. As you know, 95% of trading is emotional, right? So if you're not centered, if you're not good, you're not going to have a good day. So long answer to your short question, at the end of the day, right? And actually I usually do it at 3 p.m. Eastern here in the United States. So an hour before the market closes, I do my afternoon mindfulness session. So I'm not, and as you know, the last hour of trading can be pretty intense, right? So I go into that last hour of trading pretty mindful and pretty centered. I tell my folks, if you make a lot of money on a trade, you should be okay. If you lose a lot of money on a trade, you should be okay. If you're not, if you're celebrating and freaking out, man, you are doing it completely wrong, right? So try and take the emotion out of the trading with a little bit of mindfulness and some yoga, something to get your mind right and stay centered. I tell folks at Top Gun Options, if you're worried about a trade going against you, you're trading too large. And I'm an options trader, so you're trading too many contracts, right? So I tell folks the max amount of risk per trade is an amount of money where you look at it and go, all right, well, that would suck if I took that max loss, but it's not going to destroy me, right? So I teach people to focus on base hits, not home runs. So really long answer to your question, but it's the wind down starts with the beginning of the day and getting myself centered and ready to go.
I love that. I've got a trader who has been part of my mentor program, Lucas, and Lucas talks about the pendulum, where at one extreme you've got euphoria and the other extreme you've got depression. And we swing through, even in a circadian rhythm cycle, we swing through those extremes. And his goal before he actually opens up his charts is to be dead set, centered, and in the middle. I love that.
It.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
really good, because you would have had to employ some of the same types of strategies, wouldn't you, with staying calm when you're landing a plane on something in the middle of the ocean that's basically the virtual size of a postage stamp.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And especially at night, it's during the day, it's fun and awesome. During the night, it's sheer terror, to be honest with you. So yeah, you have to be very, very centered. But the training, there are times where I've landed aboard the boat where I'm taxiing out and I actually don't kind of remember the landing because everything was hands, feet, everything's moving without it's kind of technically on autopilot. I'm just so trained and kind of in the zone that things happen. And then after I land, I'm like, wow, that was pretty crazy. It's the come down where I look back on it and go, man, that was pretty nuts. But when you're in it, you're not thinking of that. You're just singularly focused on the mission.
Yeah. And I think traders get that as well, where we can't even remember our past trades. Sometimes when I look back, it just seems such a swirling mass because, my first trades were from 1990, so it's going back in time.
You
And
and me
it's,
both. Yep.
yeah. So it's only just a very few that stand out. And it's not even necessarily the big losers. Sometimes it's the big winners that stand out because they can destabilize you as well. Have you found
Yeah,
that?
you can start believing your own press, right?
Yes.
If you celebrate too much, like, man, this is easy, I'm awesome. Well, that hubris is going to get you knocked down. That's why, as we just talked about, I maintain an even strain is kind of my motto. Celebrate your wins and a little bit and reflect on your losses, but do not, as you alluded to, that pendulum. Do not go out to either one of those extremes because I call that tactical trading, right? You're just going to shuck and jive and you're going to burn out. Either you're going to blow out your portfolio or you're going to burn out mentally. All these wins and then you get kicked by a big loss. It's just, man, it's all whipsawed. So just kind of get centered and just know that losing trades happen, winning trades happen, and be right down the fairway with your emotions.
Yeah, I love that. And sometimes when we're in that situation, we can only really respond to simple instructions. You were talking about that flow, that in the zone type of
Mm-hmm.
concept where it's simple things and you're doing them after another, after another. It's that structure that we need.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was given some advice, which I just think is a winner, from Dr. Hank Weisinger, who is a psychologist, and he's so interesting. He actually said what he tells his traders to do is put a sign up that says breathe slower. So
I love it.
succinct.
Yes.
Yeah. How
Yeah.
do you recover from screwing up when things go wrong?
Yeah. So, after every flight in a fighter jet, after every mission, we get in a room, we close the door, and we debrief. And we are brutally honest with each other. If you watched a debrief, you'd think we hated each other. We don't. We know we can do better, and we're going to point that out in each other. We hold each other accountable. So after every day, a winner or loser, I write all my trades down. I'm not a Word document guy or an Excel sheet guy. There's people with trade plans and all sorts of cosmic stuff. There's something to me about picking up a pen and writing down on a piece of paper, here's why I got into this trade. Here's where I'm going to get at before I even place a trade. I know when I'm getting out for minimum loss and when I'm getting out for max profit. So when I'm in it, I'm not going, wow, this is going great. Yeah, it is. But I said on this date when I got in it, I'd get out at this point. So it takes a lot of the emotion out of it. So at the end of the day, and I did this today after the market closed, I debrief. I look at each trade that I did, winner or loser, and why that happened, right? To your point, I want to debrief my winning trades too. I don't want to look at the end of the day and go, wow, you crushed it today, and let's just move on. No, 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 no. Why did I crush it? Was it luck? Was it something I did? So I keep a trade journal and I write all this stuff down. And obviously, a losing trade hurts more than a winning trade. So I definitely debrief as to why that happened. And I review this stuff. I'll go back and in time and look at stuff. For example, when I do credit spreads and options, 7, 8, 9, if I'm looking at a 70, 80, 90% profit on a credit that I took in, I close it, right? I have a saying, pigs get slaughtered. Because I remember I could probably find in my trade journal of the day, I remember turning a 70, 80, it was about a 75% winning trade on the S&P 500 into a 100% loser. I was up a couple grand and then I'm like, you know what? There's only a couple hours left in the trading day. Let me squeeze out the rest of it. Boom. Right. So, here's a famous saying. No one has gone broke taking a profit. Right. So turning a 75% winning trade into a loser, I wrote that one down in my trade journal. And I said, I will never do that again. So it's just like in a fighter jet. When we get into a room, if we didn't have a good flight, the best part about the debrief is we figured out why in that debrief we had a bad flight and how that's not going to happen again. So whether it's a win or a loser, you should debrief that and see why that happened and how you can replicate success or avoid failure.
Yeah. And look, if everybody listening can just actually think of the similarities between what Wiz is doing and what we're doing, I think that's the key, because there are going to be differences with strategy and there will be differences even from a mindset perspective. But we're looking for similarities here because you're trying to stack the probability in your favor. So just to translate some of the things that you've said for people that are perhaps starting out, when you are in a large profit, it can help to actually put a drawdown figure on your stop loss. So you need a stop loss, first of all. If you're not calculating it before you get in the trade, you're doing it wrong. You have to pre-consider where you're going to exit before you even get into the trade. So don't get tied up on the specifics of the strategy. You've got to get the concept right and then develop your own specifics. Wiz, you don't keep a written trading plan. I just want to point out some of these differences. Are you just taking records after the trade?
Yeah. I write all my trades down on 5x8. I mean, obviously I have my Morgan Stanley brokerage account that I can look at all my stuff, but I just, there's something about the human mind about picking up a pen and writing stuff down because you see your own handwriting, right? Before I get into a trade, I'm like, all right, this is when I'm going to get out for max profit or minimum loss. A couple of weeks from now, when I hit one of those things, I'm like, hey, Wiz, this is what you agreed to do when you got into it, man. This is your writing, right? So yeah,
Yes.
I write all this stuff down and it reminds me like, oh yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I said I was going to get out at this point. What am I doing? Am I going to break my own, I call it an SOP, standard operating procedure. You're going to break your SOP, Wiz? You're the commanding officer. You can break the SOP, but you agreed on this date, warning, you might be doing something wrong here.
Yeah, so just to clarify, Wiz does keep a written trading plan, but we're just using different terminology. So I do not want emails from people listening to this going, oh, well, Wiz doesn't need a plan. He
No,
does.
I use a 7-step trade plan that I used over
Ah,
the skies of Iraq. And I helped run a multi-billion-dollar volatility arbitrage firm in Chicago. No. I have a 7-step trade plan. Step 1, what's my strategic mindset? Bullish, bearish, volatile, neutral. Step 2 is the target, the underlying, the stock, the ETF, or the index. Step 3 is what I call commit criteria, right? Why am I committing capital to this trade? I call this the elevator pitch or the cocktail party pitch. Give me 3 to 5 sentences as why you are committing capital to this trade. And they better be laser tight. You better be able to rattle off, here's 3 to 5 sentences, Wiz, why I'm getting in a trade. It should be good enough where I go, whoa, I need to be in that trade. That sounds awesome. And then the rest of my trade plan is how I'm putting the trade on. And then, like I said, the exit plan, when I'm getting out, either for minimum loss or maximum profit. So yeah, I have a 7-step trade plan, but I write it down. Like our trade plan, some folks put it on an Excel sheet or a Word document. I'm a caveman. So I just pick up my pen and I write my stuff down. But yeah,
I'm
no.
loving it. Yeah.
Trading is a form of combat, right? Somebody's going to win and somebody's going to get their rear end handed to them. So I use the same procedures that I use in an F-18 cockpit in my trading. So yeah, do not do any of this. You do not go into combat without a plan.
Yeah, it is such a core of effective trading. There is no doubt. And I want to talk about extremes because I think it's interesting. A lot of people are never going to experience the height of adrenaline that you have experienced in your 48 combat missions. My gosh. But when we're training traders, I do think it's really important that we consider extremes of emotion. Did you
Mhm.
do desert training when you got started?
What do you mean desert training?
So I've heard that there's survival training in the
Oh
desert
yeah, yeah,
that a
yeah.
lot of
Survive. Yeah,
military, yeah, guys do because
yeah.
then it's the absolute extreme and it's not only testing the bounds of their own mindset, it's also testing teamwork if you're going to be placed in a team. Have you got that as a background? Because I think that's an example of an extreme in the
Yeah,
military.
we do. Any aviator has to go through what's called SEER training: survival, evasion, resistance, escape. SERE. So I was in the mountains of Southern California, and you have to try and evade capture. And these guys are dressed in Soviet uniforms. They got things. They speak Russian. It's creepy because you're starving. They throw you in a POW camp, and it's the only place in the U.S. military where they're allowed to hit you. So and here's what, total tangent, but you ready for this? This is why a couple of years ago in our country, at least, there was this whole debate about waterboarding, right? We were waterboarding terrorists and, it helped and the country freaked out about it. Guess who got waterboarded? I got waterboarded. I mean, in the POW camp, it was the most terrifying. I would have told them, my social security number and the login to my bank accounts at that point. So I got waterboarded. So it's really interesting. So I've been on the extreme of, I mean, it cracked us all up, because we're not supposed to talk about this, but since it came out on a national stage, like we shouldn't be waterboarding terrorists. I'm like, all my buddies, all our fighter pilots are on our phones going, are you paying attention to this? We got waterboarded and they have a problem doing it to terrorists. Okay, that's awesome. So
Wow. Oh my
yeah,
goodness. So
that was
traders
nuts.
to test yourself in those extreme situations before you even get involved in the market, I think can help. But then you'll only learn a certain amount through paper trading where you're not
Yeah.
actually putting money into the market because you're lacking that emotional viscosity where you're
Yes.
in the thick of it and it's almost like your brain switches off. It's
Hmm.
so different if you're actually being waterboarded compared to
Yeah.
reading about it. Goodness
Correct.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was brutal. But I agree. Definitely paper trading is a great idea because
Yeah.
as an aviator, I when I went to flight school, I didn't read a book on flying the Hornet and run out to the F-18 because I would have crashed and died immediately. We go to the simulator building. So we go in the simulator building and engine fires, checklist, takeoff, weapons employment. We do everything in the sim before we get airborne in a Hornet. It's cheaper and safer. So yeah, paper trading is an incredible idea until you are ready to get airborne for real and put real capital at risk. But to your point, it's once you're putting some skin in the game for real, it definitely switches your mindset just a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah. And I wonder if some of it's to do with chunking. So, one of our mentorees, Richard King, is an aviator as well. And as you've probably guessed, I've got such a soft spot for military people. Oh my God, I love your discipline
That's
and the
great.
way you think. I mean, I think it's fascinating. And Richard told me that he changed planes. He flies commercially now. He changed planes where all of the like controls around him with this French plane that he switched to were on the opposite side.
Mm-hmm.
So he had to really simulate that a lot before they obviously let him fly
Yes.
a commercial plane. But that
Mm-hmm.
twist is quite a difficult thing. We are
Oh yeah.
neurally very plastic, but we do revert to habit.
Mm-hmm.
We have a situation where those pathways are so entrenched, and unless we have actually trained our lizard brain by constant repetition and
Mm-hmm.
constant forcing in that good information so that it's automatic, we can actually struggle. I think that with trading, we can get into systems where we chunk these things together as shortcuts, but sometimes it's good to tweak those out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about noise because there's so much in the markets to do with noise. Some of the things
Mm-hmm.
that we can do to avoid noise are things like running a scan. We can develop a trading plan that's very specific. We can have rules that we follow that look after things like liquidity. How
Mm-hmm.
do you go with filtering noise, not only in the markets, but also as an aviator?
Uh, Trading and combat seem pretty complex, don't they? Trading, especially to an outsider, somebody looks at, a fighter jet or something in combat, it looks really complex, or they look at you and I look over our shoulder trading. They're like, wow. So one of my mottos is, how do we battle complexity with simplicity? Right. We break things down, to your point, to a scan. In my cockpit, there's maybe 300 switches and dials in this thing, but there's only a certain few that are going to keep me alive or make me dead. So I call it task shedding, right? Some traders get what I call task saturation. I mean, you're just getting inundated with all sorts of stuff. And there's actually a famous aviation disaster here in the States. It was an Eastern Airlines flight at night over the Everglades outside Miami, where they put the landing gear down, and there was only two. The main landing gear, the big ones in the back, showed down and locked, but the nose showed not down and locked. And three guys, maybe 150 years of aviation experience in that cockpit at night over the Everglades at 2,000 feet, they're all like trying to pull the light bulb out and jiggle with it. One of the pilots accidentally leaned forward and pushed the control stick forward, and the autopilot disconnected. So they entered this gentle descent over the Everglades at night, and 89 people ended up dying because three guys in the cockpit. Here's the ending of it. The nose gear was down and locked. It was a
Ah,
10 it was a 10-cent light bulb, right? So nobody was paying attention, like flying the airplane. So when it gets really, really busy, you need to start task shedding things that ain't helping your mission, right? So if you start feeling like that, like, hey, I'm standing on a basketball juggling flaming chainsaws, well, maybe start putting some of the chainsaws down, right? So I actually call it task shedding. When you feel yourself starting to get a little bit underwater, start getting rid of stuff. Turn off the cell phone, whatever it is, shut the door. You need to task shed and make sure you're not going to fly your trading account into the Everglades, because
yeah.
it is possible.
And the equivalent is sometimes when I'm reverse parking my car, I need to turn off the radio.
So you can see better. Exactly.
Yeah, I gotta
Yeah,
concentrate.
exactly.
It
Get rid of
isn't,
all the distractions. I need
yeah,
to back up. I
that's it.
agree. It's the truth. That
Yeah.
shows you're smart. That shows you're like, wait a minute, I got to singularly focus on this thing. So I love that. That's a great analogy. Yep.
But we can get target lock as well. And in fact,
Yeah.
there's a few aspects to this. There's a stat that I found very interesting that 75% of airline crashes are occurring when a team of the crew is working together for the first time. So that
Yes.
crew who are a little bit unfamiliar, maybe they'd better not say something because they might transgress some
Exactly.
boundary. That is actually at the core. And the other thing that I find interesting is with parachutists. One of the fellow traders that I know here, Garnet, is a parachutist, and he tells me, based on studies, that 11% of parachutists who unfortunately have a fatality. They don't pull the emergency cord, and it's because of target lock. I did it into the back of a car one time. I became friends with this guy, actually. I got fixated on this little orange sticker on his bumper bar, and I'm like, look at the orange sticker, look at the orange sticker, look at the orange sticker. Ah, smack. I smacked into the back of him. 20 years later, we're still friends. So with target lock, I think that can be difficult. Traders think that they're trading something that they want in that chart, but not what they're actually seeing. What would your advice be to avoid target lock?
Yeah, well, first, trade the market you have, not the one you want. Right? A lot of folks try and wish something that ain't going to happen. So trade the market you have, not the one you want. Be present and be in reality. How do we avoid target lock is, as you alluded to, keeping that scan pattern going, not singularly focused, staring at one thing, coming up for air. And sometimes, you should, if you're self-aware, like you turning down the radio, you should recognize that, like, you know what, man, I feel pretty. That's your gut. That's your intuition. My intuition is saved. I should be dead 20 times over flying a fighter jet, but my gut, or we call it the hair on the back of our neck, was standing up like, all right. So the key is to recognize that feeling, like, whoa, and then immediately react. Not, do I have that feeling? No, I'm going to keep, fixating here. And then you're going to fly right into the ground. So we call it a scan. Keep your scan going. Do not fixate on on the light bulb that was burnt out and you flew into the Everglades. So you got to keep what is called a scan going, or get up and walk. I always tell people, hey man, get up and go take a walk. Go outside, walk around, get some fresh air, do some breathing exercises, and it'll center you and bring you back. Because if you are just in it, man, you are going to fly into the ground.
I love that. And for those of you that aren't watching the video on youtube.com/trading game, what Matthew was doing there was moving his head around. Now, it is interesting as well that there are studies that show that if you can engage peripheral vision, then target lock isn't as much of a risk. Target lock often occurs in the very direct line of sight, in the very front of us. It's that tiny little area of focus. So if you can actually engage peripheral vision, that can help, because I've done it with trading. I can see a particular candle pattern. It's like I'm locked onto that. Then I freak myself out of a position. I remember one with Toll Holdings where it threw a dark cloud cover. It was nowhere near my stop. And I pulled the trigger and got out. And I do think that's an example of target lock.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we call it in aviation, we call it looking through a soda straw, right? You just get so, it's like, or a toilet paper or a paper towel holder, man. You are just, that's it. So you're right. Put down the toilet paper holder and look outside of your periphery, or like you said, keep that scan going. Actually move your head instead of staring at something. I agree.
Pretty sure it's a man look in the fridge. You say, go get the mayonnaise, and I can't see it, but the mayonnaise is really there.
It's right in front of you. Exactly.
I was told recently that the secret of a good SAS soldier is making the right decision, even though you've got incomplete or ambiguous information. And I feel it's the same with a trader. We usually have incomplete information, and sometimes we have conflicting signals. Sometimes it's very ambiguous. How do you live with that type of uncertainty?
But first of all, recognize everything you just said. If you had absolute certainty, you'd be Bobby Axelrod from Billions, or Stevie Cohen or Ken Griffin. You'd be running Citadel. And even that guy or those two guys don't have absolute clarity in everything, folks. So first of all, recognize that there ain't no way. And it's not funny, but it's in a dark way. It's funny. I mean, I've heard of traders getting some inside information, like a hot tip, but it's insider information, and losing money. So they actually thought that they had, perfect knowledge, and then it actually moved against them. And the government or God has to really hate you, because I've seen guys get prosecuted for insider trading that lost money. I mean, you really got to be, excuse me. So you got to recognize that you will almost never have absolute clarity into everything or what's going on. So just recognize that. And as we
Mm.
alluded to a little earlier, it's that position sizing. And, as I alluded to in step 3 of my trade plan, my commit criteria, I say, here's three, and I write it down, like I told you, 3 to 5 sentences. Why am I committing capital to this trade? And I actually stole that term from flying a fighter jet. If I'm circling overhead the aircraft carrier and there's bad guys over Iran, but they're just circling, they haven't hit what is called my commit criteria. Okay, now they've kind of turned towards me. All right, it still hasn't hit my commit criteria. Now they're climbing and they're accelerating. Okay, now it hit my commit criteria. I'm going to turn towards them and intercept them. So it's got to be laser like 3 to 5 sentences while you're committing capital to this trade. Anytime one of those sentences changes, you got to go, my commit criteria has changed. Am I staying in this? Right. And that's what I call a PIC moment, a pilot in command moment. If you look at your 3 to 5 sentences and go, man, those 2 sentences just changed, you should, what I call eject. You should get out of the trade, just like ejecting out of a jet, man. Like, you know what? This thing's on fire. It's time to give it back to the taxpayers. So that commit criteria is a critical part of the process. If the reasons I got into this trade have changed, eject. Or you look at your commit criteria and go, yeah, you know what? A couple of those sentences aren't true anymore, but I'm the pilot in command and I'm going to, I'm sticking a cigar in my mouth and my scarf out the cockpit and we're going to, banzai or something like that. But at least you made that decision. You made a conscious decision like, all right, it's going against me. I wrote down these things, but you know what? I'm the commanding officer and I'm in it to win it. And then if it goes against you, you broke your own rules, right? So that all of those things combined, I think would really help.
Yeah, yeah. And what you're talking about is reframing. There's some research by Kelly McGonigal, fascinating research from Stanford. And what Kelly found is how we react to stress can depend on how we frame it. So if we think of stress as being, it's crushing, it's sucking the life out of me, it's overwhelming, we will act with poorer performance. Whereas
Yes.
if we reframe it and if we say we're excited, that feeling before you open your charts, are you stressed or are you excited? If we can reframe it as excitement, then we've got more of a chance of thinking clearly, being objective, and actually making solid decisions. So I do think framing can assist. What are your
I
thoughts
love
on
that.
that?
You nailed it. Framing what a beautiful way to say it. If you open up your account for the day and you're like, all right, man, I need to do X, Y, and Z today, you're already coming from a place of lack, I call it, right? Like, oh man, I need to make X amount of money on my weekly options trade this week. You're already starting to lose, right? Start with that positive mindset, like you talked about. Don't come from a place of lack, come from a place of abundance, right? Completely reframe how you start your day. Not I need this, just completely frame it. Hey, it would be nice, or just a small shift in your mindset is going to help you immensely with your mindset as the trading day or the week goes. If you're coming from a place of lack, your body's going to know it, your mind's going to know it, and you're going to make poor decisions. And nobody wants that. I think that's a great way to say it. Definitely reframe instead of coming from a place of lack, coming from a place of gratitude. When I was in Chicago in the board of trade, helping run this volatility arbitrage firm. This is interesting because, somebody kicked my office door open, like whiz, 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 all animated or whatever. I'm like, did anybody die? And they're like, what are you talking about? No, we're having some problems, getting quotes from the PhilX to the trading floor. I'm like, did anybody die? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, then calm down. Right? Because in my old career, somebody could kick open my door and it was because somebody died. So kind of reframe things, right? It can always get worse. If you have a bad trading day or kind of went against you, you're getting to go home that night, or you're at home and hopefully some loved ones, or you got a roof over your head. You're doing better than 98% of people on this planet, folks. So always kind of don't come from a place of lack. I love your reframing the way you put that. Come from a place of gratitude. Thank you, God, source, creator, whatever word you want to put in there. Thank something for being able to trade and to be able to invest, because a lot of people ain't that lucky on this planet.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And you've touched on a topic which is approach motivation. So I'll give you an example as to how this comes into play. You can say to yourself, I just don't want to lose. Or you can say to yourself, I want to be the best trader I can be. Now, that being the best trader you can be actually is more encompassing of an identity. It's an approach towards an aspirational mindset and identity, and that is really where we need to be. I want to actually move on to another area of expertise there, because inspiration is so important for traders. That is a real core behind this podcast, actually. And there is some research I've come across which is fascinating. It's saying for inspiration to really hit home and to capture your heart, there are 3 characteristics. Firstly, the approach motivation, which I just described. Secondly, evocation, which is evoking emotion, bringing up emotion, things that make you feel deeply. And this is the area that I want to talk to you about, because I've been dying to get you on the podcast to ask you this. The last one is transcendence. Now, transcendence is that external source that has created an incredibly memorable, almost psychic experience that raises you out of your own consciousness and changes you forever at your very, very core. Now, it can be that you can achieve this through meditation. It can be that there are other aspects like using psychedelics, and this is an area of expertise. I have found this for my own life in terms of meditation. Psychedelics, just as a little bit of a disclaimer here, we are talking about some of the drugs have not been classified as legal other than for therapeutic use. So please do take everything I'm saying here and that Whiz is saying in terms of the legalities, in terms of your own location and situation. Different areas have different legalities around this. But I'll give you perhaps an example from my own life, and then I would love to hear your thoughts on these, because I know you're looking after soldiers and first responders with PTSD using psychedelics. Now, I was on a particular medication. I was sitting in a park. I saw these 2 birds popping into this hollow in the tree, having basically a day spa. It must have filled up with water, and they were in there and they were reveling. And I have to say, it was so many years ago, and it was clearly under the under the medication influence, but I just felt like I was totally one with nature. I was witnessing it. I was experiencing it. I had a place in the universe. I really belonged. And that feeling has never left me. It was so simple and so graphic in terms of the colors that it evoked. And I've just felt ever since that I'm connected at a very core level to nature, and it has brought so much joy to my life. Now, I know you've got other things you want to say here. I'm just going to open it up. Could you tell us about your experience with transcendence, and how have you found that that has helped the people that you're looking after?
Oh, man. First of all, what a beautiful experience. We are all connected. When you think about it, those birds, that tree, you and I, we are nothing but cosmic stardust. We are all one, because we all came from that initial, in the fraction of a blink of an eye, this universe came into existence. And here you and I are on a podcast. That is just so, every once in a while, I got to take a step back and just, it almost hurts to imagine that. Right. So, but yeah, so, and, to tie this back to trading, first of all, I did not do psychedelic assisted therapy to become a better trader, right? I did it to become a better father, husband, human being. But I will tell you, after getting back from doing the medicine, I things are completely different in my trading. So I just want to say that. And for folks who follow, the NFL, Aaron Rodgers, famous quarterback in the States, has done psychedelics, and he said that too. He's like, I didn't do ayahuasca to become a better football player. It's kind of been a a side benefit, so to speak. So let me lead with that. But my experience with transcendence is, and I had to learn this SAT word. I probably should have known this before I did psychedelics, but ineffable. Actually, I had to look that word up. My experience is ineffable. I can't even put into words. It doesn't do justice to what I experienced. So, and I know you have a big military following. So a lot of the gals and the guys will know these people who I'm going to bring up. So a couple years ago, I started a nonprofit because here in the States, anywhere from 20, 22 up to maybe 40 veterans take their own lives every day. It's just, it's heartbreaking. I mean, one veteran taking their life. So I started a foundation a couple years ago. I'm like, I don't know what I was going to do. I got to stop veteran suicide. Buy suits, give them resume. I just didn't know what to do. And a buddy of mine's like, hey, there's a group of Navy SEALs that go down to Mexico and they do psychedelic assisted therapy. And we got an interesting group going in a couple weeks. Would you be interested? I'm like, go to Mexico for a weekend and do drugs with Navy SEALs. I mean, sign me up for that. That sounds like a weekend that, yeah, man, sure. Luis, I had no idea what I was getting in for. I'm glad I had that short period of time, because if I actually looked, no, I still would have went. But I mean, this was a God moment, right? Because I'm like, yeah. So to a lot of the viewers and the listeners, I went down to Mexico with Marcus Luttrell. If you've seen the movie Lone Survivor or read the book, he's a famous Navy SEAL. And then speaking of trading, one of the guys that started Black Rifle Coffee Company, JT, Jared Taylor. So Marcus, JT, another veteran Navy SEAL, and an NFL player who was actually suffering from horrific CTE. I mean, this guy, let me tell you his story real quick first, because
so CTE is the concussion issue that we are seeing in so many of our sports people.
Yeah.
And because the brain suffers that blow against the skull, there are tiny little micro tears that form that can't even be detected with a medical scan. And often it's after the person has actually died, where they've devoted their brain to science, they've donated their brain, where these issues have been revealed. Sorry, continue.
Yeah. No, so, you fly into San Diego and we kind of take a caravan because, of course, it's a felony and illegal in San Diego, but an hour south, it's legal. Go figure. But I rode in the car with this guy, and I'll tell you, Luis, he was death. He's a big dude, right? And he just looked like death. Let me fast forward to a year after we got back from Mexico. I'm at a fundraiser in San Diego, and I walk past this big dude, and he throws me an elbow. I'm like, whoa, am I going to get into a fight? This guy's huge. It was him. He was a completely different human being, full of light and love. I mean, I was like, oh my God, dude. Gave him a big hug. He's like, you didn't recognize me? I'm like, no offense. No. So anyway, we go down to Mexico for a weekend, and we did IBO Gain. So Iboga, IBOGA, is the most powerful psychedelic on the planet. It's a root from Gabon or Central Africa. It's got about 14 alkaloids in it. And in the West, we pull out one of the alkaloids called IBO Gain. And it's really good for PTSD, traumatic brain injury for Navy SEALs, and CTE for athletes. So we don't have enough time on your podcast, but I will tell you, it was a 12 to 14 hour, it was without a doubt the most spiritual experience of my life. I lost, when I was growing up, I grew up in New Jersey. I was Irish Catholic kid, six kids in my family. I was that stereotypical, I was an altar boy, Catholic schools. It didn't get any more religious than us. But my middle sister, Monica, when she was a freshman in college, she was killed by a drunk driver when she was 19. And that was a hand grenade in my childhood. It destroyed my parents. It was a horror. Unfortunately, after she passed away, there was some sexual trauma as well as a child. And then I go into the military. So I didn't heal any of that stuff. And now I'm in the military. And in 15 years of flying fighters, I lost 16 buddies due to not one combat loss. These were mechanical, stupidity, weather, God, it was So take all that trauma and just push it down inside me. And over the years, it kind of started escaping with drugs or alcohol or just stupid things. And I bring this up because on the IBO Gain, and my dad died at 65. He died of a broken heart. I never saw that man smile again after my sister died. Matter of fact, when I had kids, I remember sitting with my dad watching my kids playing. I'm like, Dad, how did you do it after Monica died? And he looked at me. He's like, I had you guys. He's like, when they lowered her into the ground, I wanted to jump in with her. And oh man, real quick, I played sports in high school, and I'd miss the bus in the afternoon, and my dad would pick me up. And in between my high school and our home was a cemetery, and he stopped every day, and he cried every day. I bring this up because on the medicine, there's my sister, there's Monica, angelic. I can't even describe. And there was my father next to her, and he was smiling, and I hadn't seen him smile. And I was healed, right? 4 decades of trauma were healed, but they started to, pixelate's a bad word. They went away, and I was crying out, don't leave me. And they came back, and they looked at me, and this time, for whatever reason, I followed them, and they went into everything. They went into my daughter. They went into the trees. They went into the sunset. And I was at peace. They're here right now on this podcast. They never left. They never left. So that entire experience, being one with, and I don't want to offend people, but I choose to use the word God. But man, I was connected to creator, source, divine truth. I prefer to use the word God, and God for 12 to 14 hours gave me a tour of my life, my future, deleted the drugs, the alcohol, the shame, the regret. And it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. That was the IBO Gain, right? 2 days later, we actually did what is called 5-MeO DMT. It's a desert Sonoran toad. And I'll tell you, it's like Star Wars. I went from sitting here, you inhale it. I went from sitting here, it was like Star Wars when they make the jump to hyperspace or light speed. I went from 0 to infinity in the blink of an eye. Now, I'm currently a pilot. I own a couple of my own fighter jets that I take people flying in, and you don't want to hear a pilot say this, but it's okay. I have zero fear of death now. I know exactly what's going to happen when I take that last breath because I felt it. I exploded into light, love, energy forever. It was absolute perfection. But here's the funny part. It was kind of like being, the IBO Gain was a cleansing. God kind of gave me, it's like he or she, it just kind of had me under its arm going, and then the toad was now you're with me. Now you physically can, do you get this? And I'm like, I got it now. But here's the funny part. This is like Apollo 13, the re-entry. I didn't want to leave, right? This was perfection. But I had to, you can't stay, man. Go, you got work to do. You got this, go help other people. I'm like, all right. I couldn't fit back into this imperfect vessel. I remember trying to come back into this thing, and there was still some darkness, right? There was still some shame or regret or alcohol or some drugs in here. And I remember I screamed at the top of my lungs. I remember that one. And they told me this later at dinner. Now I'm going to tell you everything that they saw, and I'll tie it to what I was doing. They're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I remember that yell. They're like, guess what you did? You got into a fetal position. Because I still remember there was still a little bit of shame or whatever left. They're like, dude, you yelled louder and longer at the top of your lungs. And as we're like looking at you, we don't know how you did it. You flipped. I did a forward flip in this bed. I think as a kid, maybe twice, I tried to do a flip into a pool and I landed on my back. I flipped in this bed. I don't remember doing that. but it was an exorcism, right? And I remember coming out of the 5-MeO, and the three people, the doctor and my guide and a Navy SEAL who was holding space for me, I'll never forget their faces because they were close and they're all crying and they look, and I'm like, I've never felt better. I look at them, I'm like, are you guys okay? They're like, are you okay? I'm like, I have never felt better. And this is what really cool because they told me at dinner, they're like, do you remember one of the first things you said? I'm like, no. They're like, I can't wait to tell Susie, my wife, I love her forever because I finally know what forever feels like. Louise, this answered one of my questions. Since I lost people in my life, I got this question answered. I've always wondered, are they bored? Right? Is my dad, is my sister bored in heaven, like looking at their watch going, dude, where is it's been a while. No, I felt forever, which is now. There ain't no time and space. I felt connected to everything. I felt connected to God, and there was no time, and it was perfection. So after I got back, that might have been more than you wanted, but I got back from that retreat and I said, this is the way. This is how we're going to save and change lives. So for the past couple of years, we've been giving healing grants to veterans, first responders, and their families, because my wife served, man. 99% of my wife's trauma is whiz induced. And she actually went down and did the medicine. She did psilocybin with some Navy SEAL wives, and we've never been a better couple or human being. So I got back, and man, and it's incredible. If I'm not on a retreat, I'll get a text like, you cannot put a dollar or an emotional value on this type of text. Whiz, I don't want to kill myself anymore. It's just, it's insane. To your point, I appreciate the disclaimer. In the United States, at least, a Schedule I drug is defined as no therapeutic use and a high risk of addiction. Folks, I just defined a cigarette and alcohol. They're addictive and they'll kill you. But the medicine that I did, it's anti-addictive. I don't want to go do that again. I'm good.
Yeah,
and it
so
was the most
let's build
therapeutic
some
thing in my life.
boundaries around this as well, because psychedelics are contraindicated if you have got a family history or you have a personal history of
Correct.
bipolar or any disease that could possibly be neurologically based. Because what
Correct.
the actual psychedelic does is it breaks down barriers between the synapses. So you have got a more free flowing brain. You are delving into areas. That's why
Correct.
past trauma can come up. That is why images of your future self and your future identity can come up, because you are free flowing synaptically inside your brain. So they've looked at this under MRI. And if you haven't been exposed to this type of discussion before, just know that it actually is scientifically based, that we are
Oh, yeah.
studying this at the moment. And the other aspect I'd like to point out is that you don't do this alone, for God's sake. Don't do
No,
this
no, 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 no,
alone.
no, no.
So you
No.
listen to what Wiz is saying. You have a
Yes.
guide with you, because there is, of course, when we're opening up these potential pathways that are untrodden by
Mm-hmm.
your brain, you can actually delve into some dark black areas, and you do need
Correct.
somebody to put that into a therapeutic frame so that you can benefit from that. That is
I
why
love it.
psychiatrists are using this, and that is
Yes.
occurring in Australia as well with MDMA. So I do want everybody listening to realize that there are boundaries around this, but there is
Yep.
also evidence-backed methods that we're talking about. This is not going to do some psychedelics with your mates in
Correct.
Tasmania because it seems like fun. This is actually purpose-driven and purpose-driven, the way that Wiz is describing it. Have I missed anything out there, Wiz?
You nailed all of it. I remember being down there and I'm like, I'm healed, I'm healed, I'm healed. And my guide and the doctors and nurses are like, Wiz, that's great, but 5% is here, the medicine. 95% is the integration. I am still integrating that 5-MeO experience and the IBO Gain. I still get downloads a couple of years later. It's a lifelong integration. if you don't integrate properly with a guide like you're talking about, it's just an experience, and you might be a little confused. You definitely need some help kind of unpacking. So I love that. You nailed it. Tazzy, that's fantastic. I've been to Hobart. I told people if I won the lottery, I'd move to Tasmania tomorrow. But it's funny because my wife and I were in a cab in Sydney, and the taxi driver really friendly. He's like, "Hey, where are you off to, mate?" I'm like, "We're flying down to Hobart to Tasmania." He's like, "That's like your Alabama. That's our Alabama." I'm like, "Oh, that's a really interesting reference." We got there. I'm like, "Okay." Susie and I were like, "Yeah, this is like their Alabama." But what beautiful beaches and everything like that.
It
But
is
you nailed
gorgeous.
it.
Yeah.
The there you definitely need to put some guardrails around it. I love that you brought that up. We actually there's been some folks who have either had bipolar or a history of whatever. All of these clinics have doctors, and they don't look at that as a barrier. Just go to the right place where they can evaluate you. Sometimes I hesitate even bringing up my experience because everybody's is going to be different. What you're going to get, you're going to get. And the medicine, there's a lot of what I used to think were corny phrases about the medicine that I've validated all of them. One of them is you're going to get exactly what you need, not necessarily what you want, which is very powerful. And another one of those sayings that I'll give you is the medicine calls to you. What do I mean by that? This isn't like if it is, you get what I'm saying to you. If it's calling, listen to it, but it's not if it ain't calling, it's not calling. So
Yeah.
that's
So
one
you've
of the
got to
things I
make
want to
your
share.
own decision. Oh, look, Wiz,
Yeah.
you've just been awesome to talk with. This has been fascinating. Now, I would really love for everybody to visit your website, nofallenheroesfoundation.org. Watch the
Mhm.
documentary. I just loved it. And also, you've got an educational service around the trading arena as well, topgunoptions.com. Wiz, can you perhaps fill in some blanks here? What will people find on your website, and how is it best for people to stay in touch?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram. It's official_Whiz Buckley. That's a great way to keep in touch. It seems like all the cool kids are using social media nowadays. But as you alluded to, you can go to nofallenheroes.com too, and it redirects to the foundation website. Go check out a quick clip of the documentary and see if that speaks to you. No Fallen Heroes also has a YouTube channel where I post a lot of my podcasts where we talk about the medicine. Oh, before I forget, as you were talking about containers around the medicine, Marcus Luttrell, he showed me his brain scans from the VA, dark, black, gray. 3 months after the medicine, white. He told me, he's like, the VA almost like killed me from radiation poisoning because they kept thinking that they're like, these clearly aren't your scans. Here's your scans and dark. And he's like, no, I did this stuff down in Mexico. So there is science around this, folks. The neuroplasticity of being able to regrow dead or damaged brain cells. So I love this. Google's your friend. Google these medicines. Google the research. Here in the States, Johns Hopkins University has a ton of research on psychedelics. The University of Texas, the Dell School of Medicine, is doing a psilocybin study with Gold Star moms and spouses. And I have a friend who's helping in that study. He's like, Wiz, wait until you read these results. These are women who've lost husbands or sons. And he's like, it's coming out. You're going to be blown away. And one more point, these medicines have been used for thousands and thousands of years, right? The Bawidi in the middle of Gabon, they kind of laugh at us a little bit like, what's with the lab coat and the beakers? We've been doing this for a couple centuries and this works. I get the studies are needed and knock yourself out, but it's typical us in the West going, look at these psychedelic medicines can help people. And you got a medicine woman in the middle of Amazon going, duh. That's where y'all been.
Exactly. Oh my
So,
gosh. And there
Isn't that
are
funny?
other methods other than this aspect that you can transfer transcendence from also. So there are things like
So true.
EMDR. Dr. Peter Holzman, who is a member of our mentor program, is a specialist in EMDR. There's tapping therapies. Deb
Mhm.
Selway introduced me to that, also a member of our mentor program. There's meditation, and of course the religious aspect as well has that element of transcendence. So this is just one method to develop that transcendence, to get that inspiration from those three areas: the approach, motivation, transcendence, and evocation. Wiz, you have
Absolutely.
just been a champion. I have loved this
I love it. Yeah.
conversation. Thank you so much. And I'll
Thanks for
pop
having me.
everything in the show notes about how you can contact Wiz. So to access those show notes, come to talkingtrading.com.au, look up this episode, and you'll be able to see how to contact Wiz. Thanks so much for your time, Wiz.
Thank you. God bless, folks.